Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're taking a look at TikTok.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And specifically those community guidelines, those rules
Like,
that kind of dictate what you can and can't do on the platform.
yeah.
I'm sure you've scrolled past them a million times just hitting that agree button.
Yep.
But have you ever actually stopped to think about what's in those things?
Right.
We're going to do that today. We're going to actually crack them open because they offer a really interesting glimpse into how TikTok is trying to walk that line between freedom of expression and keeping the platform, safe and enjoyable for everybody.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It is a tough one, especially with their most recent update in April of 2024.
Right.
So where should we start?
Well, I think it's easy for people to forget that behind all the, fun and games, the dances, the trends, there's this massive effort to moderate all that content that's flowing through. Yeah. I mean, just think about it. Millions of videos uploaded every single day. Yeah. How do they even begin to manage that?
That's exactly what we're going to find out.
Yeah.
And a good place to start, I think, is with their mission statement.
Okay.
It says, to inspire creativity and bring joy, which sounds pretty upbeat.
It does.
But how does that actually translate into content moderation policies?
Well, it's interesting that they highlight joy specifically.
Right.
It seems like they're really focused on positive interactions, and they really want to create a certain kind of online atmosphere. And maybe that explains why they're not just, focused on taking down harmful content.
Right. They have this whole 3-tiered system. I think it's really interesting. It's not just about deleting things. They tackle content in a few different ways.
Right. So you have your sort of first line of defense, which is just outright removal.
Yeah.
Content that violates their rules, whether it's public or private messages, doesn't matter. It's gone.
So that would be things like, promoting violence, illegal activities, explicitly sexual material, all that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The stuff that's just like a hard no.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what about content that maybe doesn't need to be banned outright, but still needs some oversight?
Right. So that's where their age restriction policy comes in. I mean, they recognize that, certain content, even if it's allowed on the platform, it might not be appropriate for all ages.
Sure.
So they restrict access to things that could be harmful or disturbing to younger users. So things like violence or suggestive content, mature themes, that sort of thing.
So it's kind of like a movie rating system for TikTok.
Exactly.
Making sure that users, especially the younger ones, aren't exposed to content that they might not be ready for. Okay, so that covers the content that gets removed or restricted. But what about stuff that's like technically allowed, but maybe not something that TikTok wants to actively promote?
Yeah. So that's where that third tier comes in, for UFeed ineligibility.
Okay.
And this is for content that might not technically violate any rules, but it doesn't really align with the kind of experience that TikTok wants to create on that main feed.
Like what kind of stuff?
You could think of things like clickbaity content, low-quality stuff, or even those repetitive trends that they're always trying to, kind of discourage.
So even if something isn't banned, it might not get that same visibility, if it doesn't meet their standards.
Right. In a really subtle but powerful way to shape the content on the platform.
Yeah, that For You feed is like the heart of TikTok, and it sounds like they're really carefully curating it.
Yeah, they want to make sure it lives up to that whole joy thing, from their mission statement.
That makes sense. This whole system is fascinating. But it does make you wonder, who's making those decisions, right? Who's deciding what fits into each category? What's harmful? What's age appropriate?
Yeah, and what's, For You page worthy.
Right. There must be a ton of judgment calls involved.
Oh, absolutely. And there's no way around that human element in content moderation.
Yeah.
Even with all the fancy algorithms out there, there's always going to be those gray areas, those evolving trends that require someone to actually make a call.
So transparency and accountability are super important.
Absolutely.
And speaking of transparency, TikTok also seems to be really big on giving users control over their own experience. The guidelines actually highlight a bunch of tools and features that let users manage what they see and how they interact.
Oh, yeah.
So let's dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's like they know that one-size-fits-all approach to content moderation just isn't going to cut it.
Right, especially on a platform as diverse as TikTok.
Exactly. What might be fine for one person could be totally inappropriate for someone else.
Totally, and they seem to get that.
Yeah, and they've built in a lot of features to help users customize their experience. Like they use labels, to flag content that might be sensitive.
Like what kind of stuff?
Well, things like violence or suggestive themes or potentially disturbing imagery.
So you get a heads up before you actually see the content.
Exactly. You can decide if it's something you really want to see.
Oh, that's good. So it's not just like throwing everything at you.
Oh, right. And it goes even further than that. They actually require users to opt in to view certain types of content.
Okay. Interesting.
So let's say there's a video that deals with a particularly sensitive topic, like self-harm or eating disorders. They're not just going to show you that content outright.
Right.
You have to actually choose to view it by clicking through a warning screen.
Oh, wow. So it's like an extra layer of protection.
Yeah, especially for younger users who might stumble upon something they're not ready for.
That makes sense.
And they even have a feature where they'll issue warnings before you watch a video that might be visually disturbing or graphic, kind of like a content advisory, like you'd see for a movie or TV show.
Right. So even though they're not removing it entirely, they're giving you the option to make an informed decision about whether you want to see it.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance,
Between allowing a range of expression, but also protecting users.
Exactly.
From content that might be upsetting or harmful.
Right. And on top of all that, they had that safety toolkit.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
It's full of features that let you filter content, control comments, block specific users, you name it.
So, like, you could use those keyword filters to avoid seeing content related to certain topics.
Exactly. Or you can even set your account to private, so only your approved followers can see your videos.
Have you ever used any of that stuff?
Actually, I have. I find the keyword filtering super helpful.
Yeah.
It's a great way to curate your feed and avoid seeing stuff that might be triggering or just not interesting to you.
Oh, for sure. It gives you that sense of control,
Exactly. You're not just at the mercy of the algorithm.
Right. Like you actually have some power to decide what you see.
And that seems to be a core part of their approach to content moderation. They're not just saying this is what you can and can't see. They're giving you the tools to create the experience you want.
Yeah, like they're acknowledging that they can't catch everything.
Right.
So they're giving you that power to, manage things yourself.
Exactly.
But even with all these user-focused features, there's still the question of, like, how does TikTok handle feedback right?
Yeah. Do they actually listen to users?
Right.
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Their guidelines have a whole section dedicated to feedback, and it's surprisingly detailed.
Okay.
They encourage users to give input on all sorts of things.
Really? Like what?
Oh, from the accuracy and readability of the guidelines themselves to, how effective their content moderation policies actually are.
So it's not just like putting the rules out there and expecting everyone to follow them blindly.
No, they actually want to hear what people think.
That's pretty cool. It shows a level of transparency you don't always see.
Yeah, it suggests they're willing to engage with the community.
Yeah, and that they don't have all the answers.
Right, they want to hear from users about what's working, what's not, how they can improve.
That's a big deal, but of course the real test is how they actually respond to that feedback, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to have a way for people to give feedback, but it's another to actually listen and make changes based on what you hear.
So we as users have to hold them accountable.
Absolutely. If we see something that's not working or we have ideas for improvement, we need to speak up.
Right. It's a two-way street.
Exactly. They need to be open to hearing it, and we need to be willing to share.
This whole conversation has really shown just how complex content moderation is.
Oh, for sure.
Especially on a platform like TikTok that's so dynamic and fast-paced.
Yeah, it's a constant balancing act,
Between protecting users, fostering creativity,
and responding to all those changes in online culture.
It sounds like they're trying to do that with their approach,
They're removing harmful content, restricting certain stuff, shaping the algorithm, and empowering users to control their experience.
It's a lot to juggle, but at least they seem to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah.
But no system is perfect, right?
Right. There are always going to be challenges and gray areas.
So where do we draw the line between freedom of expression and creating a space that's both safe and enjoyable?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. Let's explore that in the final part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it feels like we're always trying to figure out where that line is,
Yeah.
Too much control and you risk, kind of shutting down creativity and open dialogue, but too little, and the platform could become unsafe or just unpleasant to be on. So where do you think that line should be?
Well, it's hard to say, right? Because what's considered acceptable online is always changing. I mean, what might have been shocking a few years ago is totally normal now. And TikTok, with its massive user base, and so many younger users, They're really right in the middle of all these debates.
Yeah, it makes you think about how we even define harm online, too, right? It's not just about physical safety anymore. It's also about protecting people from harassment, bullying, and misinformation.
Right. All that stuff can have a real impact on people.
Yeah, their mental and emotional well-being.
And that's what makes content moderation so tough. It's not just about getting rid of the obviously bad stuff. It's also about thinking about those subtler ways that content can be harmful or, contribute to a negative experience.
So it sounds like TikTok is trying to address all that with their approach.
Yeah.
They're not just relying on algorithms. They're giving users tools to manage their own experience.
Right. And they're encouraging feedback from the community.
And remember, those community guidelines, they're not set in stone.
Yeah.
They're constantly being updated.
Right. To reflect, how online culture is changing and all the new challenges that pop up.
And that feedback mechanism we talked about, that plays a huge role in that.
Oh, yeah. They're relying on users to help them keep up.
It's almost like they're saying, hey, we're all in this together. We need your help to make this a good place for everyone.
That's a good way to put it. It's not just them dictating the rules. It's more of a collaboration.
Yeah.
The platform and the community working together.
Which brings us to a question for you, the listener.
Oh, yeah.
Now that you've kind of gotten this peek behind the curtain of content moderation, what are your thoughts? Where do you draw the line between free speech and safety online? What responsibility do you think platforms like TikTok have?
And what about your own responsibility? Do you feel a sense of responsibility when you're using TikTok? Does knowing about these guidelines and all the effort that goes into content moderation, does that change how you think about your own role in shaping that online environment?
These are big questions, and this deep dive has hopefully given you some things to think about. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them in the comments.
Yeah, join the conversation.
And join us next time for another deep dive into the digital world.